Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening, and happy Earth Day to everybody. My name is Dale Hawkins, and joining with me on the board is Debbie Fitzsimmons, Kathy Conlon, Wendy Hampson, Scott Sharman, Scott McPhee, Jan Palumbo, and Lance Payne. And we'd like to welcome you to our last Love Your Lake session for 2026. And we are very happy to bring these to the community because we want to make sure that these are informative and to bring our community together and to make awareness of our beautiful lake, especially on Earth Day and its surroundings. Now, how this evening will work, we have our guest speaker tonight, which is Kate Butler, and she's from the Halliburton Museum. And she's going to talk about some of our lake's fascinating history, which is really interesting. I'm looking forward to that. And at the conclusion of her talk, there is a button down at the bottom, and you can ask a chat button. You can ask questions, and at the end of it, I will read the questions out, and hopefully Kate will be able to answer them for you. And just so you know that this is being recorded, and it will be on Zoom and available on our LKO YouTube channel if you know of anybody who'd like to see this who has missed it this evening. So anyhow, I would like to turn this over to Wendy, and Wendy's going to introduce our speaker, Kate Butler. Go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, thank you. Kate Butler has been the director of the Halliburton Highlands Museum for over a decade. While originally from Toronto, she used to come to the Highlands with family every summer as a child. Kate loves sharing stories from our community's history with local residents and visitors to the area, as well as celebrating our community's vibrant arts scene. She is one of the founders of Rural Rogues Productions, a theater collective with a mandate to produce original works inspired by the history, culture, and landscape of Halliburton County. Canoe FM listeners might know her voice from the Friday morning Time Warp segments, which she presents with Paul Vorvis. Or you might also recognize her from the Highlands Little Theater's recent production of Calendar Girls, where she played one of the lead roles. So I'd like to introduce Kate Butler. It's all yours, Kate.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And I should just also say, anyone who did catch Calendar Girls, if you are still looking for a calendar, definitely there are still some available in support of Brooksong. So we were thrilled to be able to raise some money for the wonderful work that they do. So if you're still looking for one of those calendars, and I should also make a great big shout out to Wendy because Wendy was the head of our front of house team for all of those shows, and it really makes a difference knowing that you've got the right people who are able to help in all corners when you're putting on a show. So Wendy, thank you so much for that, as well as thank you so much for inviting me to be here this evening. It's absolutely delightful. And I love the fact that we kicked off by acknowledging the fact that today is Earth Day. That was something I wanted to mention. I thought just how lovely to be here with you guys on Earth Day. And I hope that everyone had an opportunity to get outside today and enjoy what a gorgeous day it was out there. It really is a reminder that those beautiful summer days are coming, and we're going to have lots of them. And I know that you guys will be enjoying a lot of those, around the lake. So what I'm going to be doing this evening is sharing a little bit of history about, well, one very particular story from Cash's history. One that particularly fascinates me, and I know fascinates a lot of other people, and that is the story of the Golden Slipper Dance Hall. So we'll get into that in a second. But before we get rolling, I did just want to begin with a land acknowledgement as well. It feels appropriate. And I just want to say that I would like to acknowledge that I am currently located on ancestral lands, the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe, covered by the Williams Treaties. This area, known to the Anishinaabe as Gadaki, has been inhabited for thousands of years as territories for hunting, fishing, gathering, and growing food. For thousands of years, the Indigenous peoples have been the stewards of this place. The intent and spirit of the treaties that form the legal basis of Canada bind us to share the land for as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. So now let's carry on with the story of the Golden Slipper. But before we get to a dance hall, I want to take you back even a bit further in history because, well, the story of the Golden Slipper Dance Hall, and there we're talking about a story that begins in the 1930s. But one of the things that really always strikes me as interesting is how much changed on the shores of Lake Ashkawigamog in such a relatively short amount of time. So when we talk about the story of Cash, and some of you may already know this, in terms of European settlement on the shores of Cash, and we're going back to, well, you could say probably the mid 19th century, and particularly up at the Halliburton and well, closer to Halliburton end of Cache. We're talking even a little bit later than down towards the Minden end. And I will say that in terms of telling stories from our community's history, just because our museum is located in Halliburton, definitely I have a little bit of a Halliburton focus, a little bit of a Halliburton bent in terms of stories that I tell. But we're talking about the area around Cache in the 1850s and 1860s when European settlers were first coming to settle there. And it was, as I'm sure all of you know, but at the same time, we all find it hard to imagine, it was a bit of a hard scrabble existence. And people were trying to figure out the best way to make a living up here. A lot of people came to farm, and as we know, that, well, farming, gardening, having their own sort of adventure in the Halliburton Highlands, depending on where you are. We know that some of the early families who came to settle in the area in the 1850s and 1860s, some of them, to be quite honest, the first few winters they were here, some families came close to starvation. It was that difficult of an existence. And it did sometimes depend on which bit of land you ended up on. But it also depended sometimes on who were the neighbors who were nearby. And while everyone tried to look after each other, there were times when everyone was struggling. So knowing that was what some people were looking at in the 1850s and 1860s, to then think by the time we get to the 1930s, on the shores of Cache, we have a dance hall that is going several nights a week and is the place to go and party. I just find that extraordinary in that relatively short amount of time, how much had changed. Now, part of the reason why that change had happened, a lot of that actually had to do with transportation. Um, so you can imagine in the 19th century, coming up to the Halliburton Highlands was a long trek, pretty much from wherever you were coming from. Um, One stage upon another, upon another. I mean, if you were emigrating from, for instance, from England, that was a long, long trip. You were allowing weeks, if not months, to make your way to the Highlands. So there wasn't really necessarily the option to do things like, just pop up to the Highlands for the weekend. So a lot of things had to change. Eventually, it was roads that would make some of the difference. But prior to that, a huge change came with the coming of the railway. So the railway connecting Lindsay and Halliburton was completed in 1878. It was a 4-year job to put that railway in place, but really, as soon as the first settlers started to come to the area, people were saying we need a railway in order to connect us with the rest of the area and with larger urban centers. But it took a while, as these things sometimes do, to get things rolling. And really, the establishment of the railway was a big push in terms of why we actually have Halliburton County today, why the Halliburton Highlands aren't known today as part of Peterborough County anymore. It was that push for the railway that led to the establishment of the provisional county of Halliburton. Some people will also say that the railway is part of the reason why, to this day, according to some folks, there is a rivalry between Haliburton and Minden. There isn't, is there? No. But some people will say that there is, partly because both communities wanted to have the railway. They wanted to be the end spot in the line for the railway, and they wanted the railway to come through their town. And also, both places wanted to be the county seat for the new provisional county of Haliburton. In the end, Minden got the county seat. Haliburton got the end of the railway, with no actual rail track going through Minden. Nearest was going to be probably in Gellert. But because both places wanted both, some people say that's where a lot of the rivalry comes from. But there isn't one. So we won't talk about that anymore. All right. But the railway did, as well as opening up possibilities, there was the whole other story that the railway did encourage some people, actually, who were frustrated with farming to head west for new opportunities. But we won't talk about that right now because it did open up some possibilities. And one of the big possibilities that started to come out of that was tourism. Unless you have a reliable way for people to get in and out of the community, tourism isn't really a possibility. But the rail lines started to create those possibilities. And for a lot of people living in places like, major urban centers like Toronto, people started to be able to see that there was a possibility to get away and to go somewhere. Because prior to that, if you look at where people were spending holidays and what it meant to go away, if you didn't have that transportation, like for instance, I mean, in my own family, I can think of the fact that I know my great-grandparents, they were living in Toronto. Apparently, the cottage that they used to go to was in what is now Richmond Hill. That was what was meant by getting away for for a week in the summer. You went to Richmond Hill. I mean, today people do that daily, right? People do that commute 5 days a week. But again, it's how transportation has changed. There was also, I think, a bit of a change in mindset up here as people started to talk about the fact that, oh, there's the possibility to take in some paying guests. If you live on a beautiful lake, lake that you appreciate yourself, then what about opening up a few of those rooms to people who might also want to enjoy the area, and maybe provide some meals for them, let them soak up the atmosphere. You have to think about how you're getting them from the train, and things like that. But tourism starts to take off from that point. And it's that's not solely responsible for why a dance hall might open on the shores of Cache, but it certainly helped things along. So now that I've hopefully set the scene a little bit, let's talk a little bit about what the Golden Slipper Dance Hall actually looked like. So I'm just gonna bear with me a second. I'm just going to share my screen because I do want to show you a picture. We'll start off with a photo just of the outside of the slipper. Let's see here. Bear with me 1 second. That's not what I wanted to share. Let's try this again. All right. Let's share this one. Okay. So, sure, we'll turn that into a slideshow. From here. There we go. So hopefully everyone can now see the exterior of the Golden Slipper, or as many people locally used to call it. And as I've already heard it from at least one person already this evening, a lot of people also jokingly called it the boot, the old boot, the dirty old boot. Lots of variations on boots, but it was the Golden Slipper. So the slipper, well, where does the name Golden Slipper come from? I suppose is one question. And it's likely The name was actually inspired by a song, which started to become popular. Well, was actually a spiritual, which was popular in the States in the aftermath of the American Civil War. It was a spiritual called Those Golden Slippers. And the idea behind it was about, well, what sort of, what are you going to wear when you go to heaven? Um, and golden slippers, of course, would be one of the things on the list. Now, I should also mention golden slipper. So also, there's also it's also a popular bluegrass tune, which you might hear played on fiddle. There was also a parody, unfortunately, of that particular tune, which became later on associated with minstrel shows. So that is unfortunate. But the original name, Golden Slipper, and the original song Golden Slipper, would actually go back to that original spiritual. And this would not be the only dance hall that had the name Golden Slipper. There are many. If you start Googling, you can find lots of them. So clearly, it was quite a popular choice. Now, before the Golden Slipper opened, there was certainly um, a strong culture of arts, music, and community gatherings in the Haliburton Highlands. Just wasn't necessarily a spot exactly like this. So, a lot of people were entertaining in their homes. Winter was a particular time actually for people to gather and to um, well, for everyone to get together because there wasn't as much work to be done outside, right? So you get all of the neighbors together and you have a party. If someone's got a fiddle, someone knows how to play the piano, and there happens to be a piano in that home, or maybe an organ, um, and someone can sing, and you roll up a rug, and a few people might want to dance. So definitely, the culture's already there. We also know, for instance, that in Dysert's Town Hall, the upstairs, so Dysert's Town Hall, which is still our town hall today, it was built in 1897, but the upstairs of the town hall was originally a performance space. And if you go into the upstairs of the town hall even today, you can still figure out where the actual stage would have been. There's been a wall put in the meantime, but if you see there's a funny little set of steps that go up and to where a doorway goes through a wall. No, well, that's where the stage was. So there would be theatrical performances there. There would be musical events there, and a lot of them were actually fundraisers as well. Often, to raise money either for local churches, community organizations, or sometimes just for families in need. They would have those sorts of evenings. So yeah, there's the history, the strong history is there. But in the slipper, well, it got its start officially in the 1930s. So in 1934, the slipper actually got its start thanks to a couple by the name of Roy and Margaret Le Boutillier. Now, we will later on, a little bit later on, we'll talk about Al Perrin. You may have heard his name before. He is often associated with the Golden Slipper, but he wasn't the only one to run the Slipper. And even for about 10 years, it was actually run by Roy and Margaret Le Boutillier. So it's very important to remember that, it wouldn't have got its start when it did, and wouldn't have had that 10 years necessarily if it wasn't for those founders. So interesting, I think, that it would have opened in the 1930s. When you think about it, 1934, we're talking about the era of the Great Depression, but I think we can also recognize that it was a time when people were looking for things that were going to hopefully raise their spirits, right? People were dancing, going out and dancing was incredibly popular then. Brings to my mind some of the competitions even that were involved. with dancing at the time. There was marathon dances that they used to have. Not that anything like that, as far as I know, happened at the Slipper, but where there was actually money on the line, and if you and your dance partner could go for however many hours, if you were the last one standing, you had a chance of winning a little bit of money. So definitely dancing in the 1930s was a big way that people kept themselves entertained and kept their spirits high. And the Golden Slipper wasn't the only new attraction to be added to the area in the 1930s. In fact, in the early 30s, Halliburton also got a new hockey arena. And that was actually a bit of clever work there because one of the local mills, which had unfortunately closed, they were looking for things to do with the building materials there. And so a lot of those building materials actually got repurposed to create a new arena. But again, it was a way to raise people's spirits because people knew that they could go and cheer on the local hockey team. So there's a lot of, I think, psychology that goes into this as well that people might not necessarily have been thinking of in that particular way, but it was all about that community goodwill and community spirit. So, I mean, that's where the slipper was to get its start. Now, according to the way the 911 numbers work today, if we were to try and put an address on the Golden Slipper, we'd be looking at putting it well at 1979 on Wigmore Road heading out there. Now, I will say I was going to pull up a Google map and pin that down for you. But I don't actually agree with where Google Map puts that dot, so we'll leave that be. But I should say that to this day, the site where the slipper stood, some people, and I'd be curious to hear, some people do still refer to it as Slipper Bend. So I'm curious if anyone has heard of that curve in the road being referred to as Slipper Bend, or whether perhaps that may be something that's on the wane a little bit. It's possible. So, well, what was going on inside the slipper? Music. And it was live music. That's one of the things that uh, it makes perfect sense to us, but to have that reminder, to see it actually right there. So here we have Al Perrin and, as was referred to, his Golden Slipper Orchestra. It's a relatively small orchestra, but we're a fairly small town, right? So it's all good. Now, Al Perrin's association with the Golden Slipper goes back earlier than his actual running of the establishment. He first got involved, from what I understand, as a musician coming to the area and bringing together all of those all those talented musicians, bringing some up. I mean, there were musicians who would come out from Toronto, but also some who were local as well, bringing them together to to present live music. Now, not just one night a week, not even 2 nights a week. We're talking 3 nights a week, sometimes six. Six
Hmm.
nights a week in the summer. So that I find quite astonishing, that we had, I mean, that level of live performance up here. Now, I will say, of course, like people up here, even today say, oh my gosh, there's so much going on in the Highlands that there's no way I can possibly fit it all in and get to all the gigs I want to get to and whatnot. But, the idea of having a dance hall where people could go out and dance that many nights a week in the summer, but that was also open other times of the year as well. I think that's quite remarkable. But of course, we do also have to remember that we're talking about an era before, well, obviously, before the internet. No one's sitting at home and streaming anything. We're talking about an era even before television, before everyone had television in their homes. And also, I mean, of course, to remember that television came to the Halbert Highlands a little bit later than it may have in some of the other some urban centers. Um, Movie theaters, well, and definitely the Malu Theater in town, which I think we'll come back around to later. Yes, that was definitely a place to go, but also that movie theater was operating many nights a week. That movie theater had shows that you might have a 7 o'clock show, a 9 o'clock show, and then the weekends, you might have a midnight show. Can you imagine going to a midnight movie in Halliburton? Um, I I don't know that we can quite wrap our heads around that. Um, Things do wrap up a little bit earlier, even today, even with everything we have going on and all the transportation options that we have. But going out and dancing and being surrounded by people and being social was something that people wanted to do. Now, in those early days, some of the dances were actually square dances, which were popular at the time. But also the dances and the gatherings went very much with the ebb and flow of musical tastes. As you can see, you can just take a look at some of the musical instruments on display here. I mean, we can see there's fiddles, there's a bass, piano, saxophone. Very nice, very nice. So you can imagine all the different types of music that you could dance to could come from those instruments. Now, by the time we get to the early to mid 1940s, Al Perrin had actually taken over the running of the Golden Slipper. And as I said, his name, I think, for many people is just linked with the Golden Slipper Dance Hall. The two go hand in hand. Now, part of the reason for that, though, I think, not only was Al Perrin known locally as someone of great musical talent, but he was also someone who knew how to market. So apparently, Al Perrin used to make his way around the Highlands with loudspeakers attached to his car. And as he drove around, he would make announcements out of the loudspeakers. Things such as, "Come to the Golden Slipper, one and all, for a wonderful time. Bring your wives and sweethearts and enjoy an evening of fine music and dancing." How do you say no to that? And I'm speaking of bringing your wives and sweethearts. Certainly, the Golden Slipper was a place, well, as I said, where friends meet friends and make friends, but it was also a place where romances blossomed. Many, many romances. And I have heard so many stories from people about how they either their parents met at the Slipper or their grandparents met at the Slipper, or they know someone, another couple who met at the Slipper, and that was where their romance blossomed. And that was one of the things about the Slipper, I think, was that it provided that crossing of the local and the, I would actually say, probably as the well, might have been seen at the time, the summer people coming to the area might have been seen as kind of exotic, right? So people coming from outside the community. Now, it's not to say that a lot of the romances that blossomed weren't, local boys, local girls, local couples getting together, but also the chance of that, like that idea of that summer romance. It almost makes you think of, I don't know, like Dirty Dancing or something like that. Totally. Now I'm going off in left field. I'll leave there. But that idea of blossoming summer romances, where people had the chance to make new connections, meet new people, and that some of those meetings might change their lives. And in some cases, those people who were coming up for the summer, some of them might have been up staying with family. Some might have, families might have been renting, staying at a local lodge. Sometimes they were people who were working at a local lodge or resort. So there were lots of different opportunities, and romance after romance seems to have blossomed. So the Golden Slipper was, yeah, it was a hub for the community, but also the community, it all went together. So that there were, for instance, at the time, apparently back in well, mid 20th century, shall we say. I mean, there were four taxi companies in the Halliburton area. So there were ways to get to and from the slipper. So when you think about all those different pieces coming into play, the fact that the Golden Slipper was a bit outside of town didn't make a difference at the time. So really, it was one part in a larger sphere of activities that were happening. And then, I mean, some people, certainly from where they were staying on cash, could walk to the slipper and back. Some people would drive to the slipper and back. So it was said that the cars sometimes would stretch for half a mile in either direction. Probably the cars stretched so far back into Halliburton, you might as well have left your car in Halliburton and walked out, which is quite astonishing to think. But well, I mean, as for what was going on in and around the slipper, I mean, music, yes. Dancing, yes. Romance, possibly. But what else? So, as some of you may know, for many years, Halliburton and the surrounding area were dry. So there's a local option taken out in 1910 saying that alcohol would not be served in Halliburton. So, by all rights, though, that means that there was no alcohol at all at the Golden Slipper. Anyone believe that? No. I didn't think so. So, I mean, apparently there were also lots of stories I've heard about, some people would jokingly sort of refer to it as those sort of bootlegging deals, that people would smuggle alcohol up. You didn't have to smuggle it very far because Minden wasn't dry, or at least part of Minden wasn't dry. So, I mean, all you had to do was get it up from there. And so people would, provide drinks out of the back of their vehicle. So people would just sort of wander out into the parking lot and do whatever they need to do and wander back in. So even if technically you weren't drinking at the slipper, some people were drinking at the slipper. I do find it interesting as well. Just thinking about some of the ideas at the time about um, I suppose you could say gender roles as they may have been seen at the time. Apparently, the ladies were in for that adventure just as much as the men were. It was not a guys only kind of club. So I find that interesting that the ladies would also head on out occasionally for a drink. Which also reminds me, though, well, I mean, if we want to take a look at the dance floor, this is one of my favorite photos that was actually taken inside the Golden Slipper. And lots of people talked about the beautiful wooden dance floor, which was apparently fabulous to dance on. You can see lots of couples here. I do find it interesting because I've been told that this photo was taken in 1950. And just take a look around. And I find it interesting how many of the ladies are wearing trousers, go out for a night's dancing. I find that, I mean, just find it interesting. In 1950 that so many of them decided to, which I think it's rather cool. So I guess, feeling like it gives you a bit more mobility, chance to move in a different way, move with the music. I think that's great and quite fun. So, and you can see people are having a fabulous time. Definitely, I mean, there's lots of laughter, some hijinks. A couple of people are definitely looking at the camera and why are you taking this photo? But hey, I mean, that happens in every group shot, right? Right? So, yeah, a little glimpse into what it was like at the Slipper. And as you can see, I mean, you can see from the sign in the back as well, mentioning the hours 9 till 12. So, like I said, I mean, this used to be a relatively late night spot. So, uh, after you wrapped up at the Slipper, well, your night wasn't necessarily done at that point, which I also think is fascinating. Some of the local restaurants would actually stay open so that after you were done at the Slipper, you'd go out for a bite to eat. Again, I mean, can you imagine going to a restaurant in Halliburton that stayed open until 2 in the morning? I don't know. It's it's just a very different a very different timeline, the time schedule that the community was working on then. But it was such a huge part of life. And you can see, I mean, a range of ages as well. I would certainly say, that the Slipper always catered probably to a little bit younger of a crowd, but definitely all ages welcome. And some people would come to listen to the music as well as coming to dance. But we do see as time went on and tastes started to change, we get into, well, the 1960s. And that was when the Golden Slipper started to have a few, say, a few challenges in terms of continuing to cater to changing tastes. Now, that's no surprise. I mean, certainly that was seen across pop culture in general. When you see the divide that started to happen in terms of musical tastes at that point, as rock and roll became the dominant music that young people of the day were listening to, well, how do you change and adapt? Now, the Slipper did do its best. So the Slipper actually brought in brought in live rock bands. There was one band in particular, which eventually ended up going by the name Bad Habits. Uh, it sounds like they should be like a heavy metal band or something. But early rock and roll, but also we have to remember that we're talking early 1960s rock and roll to begin with, before things got really too wild and crazy. But it certainly meant that things had started to change. That said, though, I mean, people were still coming to hang out at the Slipper, coming from places like Lindsay, Peterborough, Huntsville. It wasn't just local. It was people who were coming from really from all over the area. Word got out about the Slipper. But eventually, and eventually, the challenge ended up being just a little bit too much. Now, I do know, it looks from what I can see, because I have seen some advertisements from what was happening at the Slipper in, even the late 60s, early 70s. There was some experimenting with different bands, and trying to change and cater to the tastes of the day, but it just ended up no longer being really sustainable. So on the left-hand side here, we can see, and this picture takes us all the way back to the 1940s, and busy night at the Slipper. On the right-hand side, we actually have this was reputed to have been the last band that played live at the Slipper, and I mean they've definitely got a bit more of a rock and roll look than Al Pear and his Golden Slipper Orchestra, right? So tastes had definitely changed. By the time we get to 1974, though, the Slipper as a dance hall was closed. There were plans then, so it was actually sold, the building was sold with the plans to turn it into, at the time, a youth recreation center. But unfortunately, that plan stalled. Sounds like it must have stalled several times over. So for about 3 years, the building sat basically vacant and unused. By the time we get to 1977, then the building was in, from what I've heard at least, it was in such bad shape that really the only choice they felt was to, unfortunately, tear it down. And at that point, a little slice of the local history of the Haliburton area was unfortunately lost. Now, apparently, when the time when the building came down, there wasn't that much in the news, but things changed a little bit after that. So I came across actually this, I find it really quite touching letter to the editor that was sent to the Haliburton Echo in 1977 by a gentleman by the name of Dick Holland. And I feel like it really gives us a window into the heyday of the slipper and what the slipper meant to people. And I don't know that I can say it any better than what he did. So I want to share this letter with you because yeah, I read it a few times and thought, nope, nope, that just needs to stand as it is. So have a listen to this. Dear Sir, it was with a deep sense of nostalgia that I read in the Echo that the Golden Slipper had been demolished. The event wasn't deemed newsworthy, except for the brief mention in the Chamber of Commerce article. For those of you close to Haliburton, it may have just been another event in the evolution of the Haliburton area. But for some of us away, I believe it brought back many memories. For those of us who spent our impressionable, searching teenage years in Haliburton in the late 40s and early 50s, the Golden Slipper was much more than just another building. The Golden Slipper was the Saturday night dance. The Dirty Boot. Al Perrin standing in the doorway. Harold Moore coming from Toronto to play the saxophone each weekend. Harold Broadhagen singing What's the Color of a Yellow Horse? Using the outdoor men's toilet. Occasional fights. Dip and diving to the ocean waves. Marshall Leighton on bass. Fred Clements on piano. Dancing on the spacious wooden dance floor. A pop and hot dog at the snack bar. Jimmy Perrin on the drums. Girls up from the lodges for the summer. Guys from the forestry school. Sneaking a drink out in the car. The OPP trying to catch someone with that evil substance called alcohol. Occasional accidents on Slipper Road. The 12 o'clock deadline approaching and the last three songs. Good night, sweetheart. I'll see you in my dreams. And God Save the Queen. A hamburger and shake at LaRue's, Highland Snack Bar, then known as Leighton's. I remember going back to the Slipper in the 1960s. It wasn't the same. It wasn't what I was used to. The band had changed. Rock music had arrived. I never went back. I just couldn't adjust. Until this week, at least the building was there to bring back memories. Now the building is gone, and in time, so will all of us. Meanwhile, Al Perrin and those of you who shared the dance floor of the Golden Slippers, thanks for the memories. Sincerely, Dick Holland. I just find that just such a really touching, moving account of someone's experience at the Slipper. And I'm sure for so many people that that touched something in them as well at the time. And that feeling of nostalgia. And I think all of us, whatever generation people belong to, we have those things that bring out that feeling of nostalgia in us, that take us back to a spot, a time in our own lives, or even a place that we remember visiting with our parents or our grandparents. And sometimes it is, as long as those places are standing, that it's that connection. But if they're no longer standing, well then we the connection's different because it becomes a connection based more in memories and photos. as well. But for so many people, the Golden Slipper was the place to be in Halliburton, not just on a Saturday night, but as many nights of the week as they could be there. And when I first started working at the Halliburton Highlands Museum, I I bet I was probably, weeks, maybe days in when I first started to hear stories from people about the slipper. And I have said that the Golden Slipper, well, um, for all the hijinks and everything that happened there, it feels like relatively few photos got taken, but everyone was so busy having a good time that I don't think people were thinking about taking photos. And of course, I mean, people back then didn't have a camera in their pocket at all times. They didn't feel a compulsion to document every moment of their lives so that they could post it on social media. People were caught up in the moment. I mean, really, um, not not that we want to get a soapbox about anything, but I don't know if anyone saw some of the recent stuff about what happened at Coachella and the fact that there people saying, does no one go out dancing anymore? Does no one sing along with the music anymore? That everyone was out there with their cell phones recording Madonna and Sabrina Carpenter, because apparently that's what we do now. But definitely, I mean, even as time goes on and years from now, that the idea of nostalgia will still hold on. That everyone's going to have their own nostalgia. It's just we may have documented our own history in different ways. But the Golden Slipper definitely is, it's definitely a Halliburton icon, and one, we're always curious to hear more stories about. So I will just leave you with the fact that right up behind me here at the Halliburton Highlands Museum, you can actually see, so on the side closer to me, those two slippers that are out there, that is actually an original sign from the Golden Slipper. Yes, it looks a little bit worse for wear, but it actually was one of the original signs. The other one is a copy. It was made several years ago, but the story of the slipper lives on. So it's something for us to celebrate and to celebrate how our community came together, continues to come together, and how people in Halliburton, and there's just a long history of loving a good time. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kate. That was wonderful. And it does bring back memories because I had mentioned before, my parents used to go and they used to call it the Dirty Boot, and they had a fabulous time. My great aunts used to own the Silver Beach Lodge, and so they used to work there and then go down there for the weekends and have a lot of fun. Anyhow, that was really interesting, brought back memories. Did they ever serve food there, or it was
So
just,
there was a snack bar.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so pretty basic from what I understand. But I mean, you work up an appetite while you're dancing, right? So
Yeah.
you need something.
And also with drinking, and I'm assuming alcohol was let back in at a certain time.
Well, yeah, I mean, so there was, yeah, well, as we know, Halburn, we're not a dry town anymore. But
No,
yeah,
thank goodness.
Mhm. The
but
other
Anyhow,
thing, the other
I
thing I
do.
remember is staying at at our grandmother's and hearing the beat coming coming from the dirty boot, as our parents used to call it. But that would have been in the 60s, I guess. Yeah, but the other thing is that our cousin was rebuilding a cottage and was using some of an existing spot, and through the renovations was taking down all sorts of layers of different wood and everything that was on in the walls, and finally got down to kind of the original wall, and there was an advertisement poster of the golden slipper, and so he's kept it. which is great.
That's fabulous.
Yeah,
Yeah, it really
which is
is
really good.
amazing.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the fact that yeah, it ended up tucked away like that. How curious. And certainly there's a lot of accounts of um, old Halberton newspapers being used as insulation in homes.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah,
Mhm.
golden slipper poster, curious.
Maybe he'd
Yeah.
like to donate it to the Halliburton Museum.
Well, I think he
Yeah.
may have.
He
But
may have. He may have done that because he's quite into that sort of thing.
anyhow, so I'm going to pass that on to Kathy. I don't think there's any more questions. I've looked in the chat and there's no more questions. So,
The only comment I was going to make is I know it's called, I'm pretty certain it's called Slipper Beach, where boats used to come up. Okay.
oh, Silver Beach.
No, it's right beside Silver Beach,
Oh, okay.
but it used to be called Slipper Beach. Slipper Beach, yeah. But and that was where the boats would come up and park, and then they would walk up the hillside to the to
Oh, to
the
the booth?
dance hall.
Oh,
Well, I mean, that was another, yeah, it was another option. You know, if you wanted, you could arrive by boat. Like by boat, by car, by taxi. You could walk. There's lots of options.
lovely. Thank you so much. All right, Kathy, I'm going to send it over to you.
Well, Kate, thank you so much for teaching us. Well, especially me, because I didn't know any of that history. Although I'm sure as a bored teenager in the 60s, I sure would have loved to have gone to the Golden Slipper. But my strict father would never have anything to do with that, I'm afraid.
Mhm.
But you really brought Halliburton alive, and thank you so much. And we have an honorarium for you, which we hope you'll appreciate and use towards more talks like that. And I hope we can have you back again. Thank you so much, Kate.
I would be happy to come back, and I'd just like to thank everyone for being here this evening. And I mean, I know it was, well, it still is such a beautiful evening outside. So I know, you know, coming and sitting in front of a screen on an evening like this, I really do appreciate all of you being here, coming and joining in on this talk. And yeah, and hopefully that's brought the story of the slipper to life a little bit and yeah, it gives you a little bit of a glimpse into what Halliburton was like in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and right through into the 70s. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kate. And thank you, everybody, for attending. We really appreciate it. And also, just wanted to highlight that June 13th, we're having our annual general meeting. And Shadow Woodland has been very gracious in giving us that opportunity to hold it in their beautiful premises again. And also, we are having another Cash Grass social, and it's going to be held at Bonneview on July 18th. So look forward to seeing everybody at both those spots. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you attending.